Hello, I'm Laura Esposito Murray, President of the Committee for Economic Development of the Conference Board. Welcome to CED's Leadership in Challenging Times series, where we feature outstanding business leaders who are recipients of CED's Distinguished Leadership Awards. This year, CED is paying special tribute to business leaders who have helped our nation navigate the many challenges before us, including the pandemic, an economic recovery that provides equal opportunity for all Americans, and building a more civil and just society. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with our 2021 honoree, Margaret Keane, who is Executive Chair of Synchrony, the nation's premier consumer financial services company. Margaret just recently stepped down as CEO of Synchrony, and as CEO, she led the company's successful initial public offering in 2014 and separation from GE in 2015. With Synchrony, Margaret set out to build a very different kind of financial services company with a focus on a culture of inclusion and innovation, which balances the needs of all stakeholders. Thank you, Margaret, for joining us.
Thank you, Lori, so much.
So I'd really like to start by stepping back and getting your assessment as a business leader who has been at the forefront of steering your company at a very critical time, both in terms of the company itself, starting in 2014 and 2015, but now in terms of the crises we're facing. And we've faced crises before, 9/11, civil unrest for social justice, global health crises. What do you think is different about the current situation? And are you optimistic that real change is possible?
Yeah, so first I'd say, I think probably the biggest difference is the scale of this last year in terms of how it impacted, one, the globe. So global businesses across the world, it impacted pretty much everyone, right? There was no one that was left out. And it really, I think, impacted not only our employees, but their families. And then we really had to focus on our partners and our business at the same time. So I think the scale and magnitude was far greater than anything in my career I've ever experienced. And I think the other challenge is, we didn't have a clear roadmap of how to operate in a pandemic, right? We had, backup plans or whatever of certain things, but the scale of this required, I think, very quick decision-making and really thinking through how you were going to move the company forward as you were trying to deal with all these things coming at you. So I think for us, one of the things that paid off was we just kept going back to our culture and our values and talked about how do we protect our people, our employees, our communities, and our partners. And we just used that as the kind of linchpin of all the decisions we started making as we were dealing with the pandemic. And then ultimately the social unrest.
And so what were the leadership tools that you drew on? Given the scale, given the fact that there was no precedent that you could actually follow regarding the pandemic itself, what tools did you draw on and how did you set your priorities?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Part of where I started initially with the pandemic was, we had a conversation in early March, actually, of, do we start closing down facilities and sites? And honestly, at first I was a little hesitant because I felt like, how are we going to close down our call centers? And I just felt it was going to be very disingenuous that, all the leadership went home and our call center people are working on the phones. We quickly pivoted and said, look, we got to get everyone home. And I think the interesting thing, and this is where I think there's positives that come out of this, is we made many of these decisions based on that center of employee and safety. And we did not have a whole bunch of PowerPoints. We did not sit in meetings and debate how much is this going to cost to send everybody home. We just went. And I think the lesson for all of us in leadership was our gut, and it was a bit of a gut. Like, we knew that we couldn't run a call center if people were going to be getting sick and we were going to have to shut down sections, send people home. It just wasn't going to work. Once we made that decision, we went full force. And I think the other piece that was really important is we leveraged our agile capabilities. We had built out agile, but we just went full board. It actually allowed our leadership team, I think, to start making decision-making in a different way. I mean, we had morning and afternoon stand-ups where we were just like literally clicking down a list of, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. And it really changed the way the leadership team is now operating. And I think, I think in the end, we made obviously the right decision. I always think about when I made the decision that we're closing and sending everybody home. And I said, we'll see everybody. We'll talk about the end of April. So this was the middle of March. Everyone was like, end of April, like what? We just, everyone left their offices thinking it was going to be 2 weeks. Like, we're going to go home. This thing is going to be over. I don't think anybody anticipated the scale of magnitude and the impact on what we've all gone through over the last, 15 months or so.
If I could also ask you to talk about how you dealt with your customers. I mean, the way the pandemic hit, it was the sharpest decline in the economy since the Great Depression, World War II period, and very close to it. But the pace was so much faster. That was a 2-3 year decline. This was a 1 month decline that happened. And your industry is right in the heart. Credit is right in the heart of that's what you provide customers. And you also move very quickly on that.
Yeah, so I think, as we were thinking through taking care of employees, we immediately put plans in place to really address any customer, challenges that they might have through the process from a credit perspective and payments and things like that. So we put all that in place. But I think the other challenging piece for us, and one that we had to pay a lot of attention to, are our partners themselves. So what you really had, and we've all seen this through the pandemic, you had real winners and people who really struggled because they were more of an in-store environment than maybe an online environment. So one of the things that we did, and again, it was, I think, a great decision on, the new CEO, Brian Double's part. He and I talked, and I was like, look, we can't operate the plan like we thought we were going to operate. So we stepped back, and Brian worked with the leadership team to really prioritize what we were going to focus on to serve our partners. And the number one thing that really came to light was just how do we accelerate all the digital things we were working on. And the team just took a full board. We stepped back, we realigned our agile teams. We did that, believe it or not, by the end of March. By the end of March, we had a whole new marching order, what teams were working on, how to accelerate what we had to do, to kind of really deliver. An example of that is we launched our Venmo card during the pandemic. And, it's a very innovative, technological, advanced card. Everything is digital about it. And what's really interesting about that is, normally we would have said we wouldn't have been able to do something like that when everyone was home. Not only us, but our partners. And I think, both the Venmo, PayPal team and our teams figured out a rhythm on how to continue innovating. So I know there's been a lot of talk about, work at home and can you innovate? We have real clear examples. You can do both. You can innovate from home. And I'm not saying we got everything right, but we definitely learned a lot. And I think it's changed how we think about innovation and how we can get things done.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because, as you said, that's the key focal point right now is innovation and whether it's remote or do you really need to come back to the office. So that's really fascinating that you had that you innovated as much as you did. I'd like to get to your other passion, which is culture. You've stated that you're most proud of forging a culture at Synchrony, centered on its values and purpose, diversity and inclusion. How did you address the civil and just society issues at Synchrony while we're going through the pandemic, and then we had the killing of George Floyd and explosion on the national scene of discussion and debate? How did you address that as you were building the culture at Synchrony, that crisis?
Yeah, so I'd go back a little bit to say that after we did our IPO in 2014, July of 2014, I actually brought the team together in that September 2014 to say, look, we got to sit and talk about culture. I have to tell you, when people talk about culture, they always think of this soft, wishy-washy thing. The reality is we were coming out of GE that had very specific culture, and we were now going to be a smaller company, public company for sure, but not GE. And I think it really required us as a leadership team to talk about who did we want to be, what values are very important to us. So one, as an example, is caring. That was a value we held close to our heart. The other value we put out there was being bold because we wanted people to take more risk. We actually validated those values with over 500 employees, and we just did it again not too long ago, and they've all held true. And so those values really became, I think, the center of what we were able to talk about during the social injustice. And I think, look, I think it was such a profound level of eruption inside the country. There was, I think, a desire for more leadership and discussion, and it couldn't just happen, at a government level. It had to happen inside companies. And so what we did is we actually took a bit of a pause. We didn't jump right out there and say, we're going to give all this money to this or that. We said, let's spend 2 weeks just talking to each other. And I will tell you, in all my career, and I've been around a long time, over 40 years I've worked, never in my life did I see people share their very, very personal stories. And, it's one thing to look on TV and see it happening to somebody, right? You can kind of say, oh, that happened over there. It doesn't impact my life or people I know, let's say. When you're talking to a colleague who then gives examples of things they've had to deal with, it becomes a very, very real story pretty quickly. And I think it opened up just a very different level of dialogue inside the company. Look, we're not perfect, but I think there's been a whole new nuance of, wow, I didn't really understand that this happened. I'm sure all of us have learned many things through this. There are a lot of historic things that people weren't aware of that are now like, wow, I didn't realize that happened. So, I do feel like it was a combination of storytelling, listening, understanding, and then really educating ourselves. And look, the education's not over. We got to continue to have that discussion, because whether it's, a person of color who has challenges, or, the LGBTQ community that, this month as we're finishing up Pride Month today, those stories are tough as well. So, but I think the fact that we had a culture where people were willing to share, to me, was pretty profound. And I think I don't think there's a person in the company who couldn't walk away feeling very differently about the topic.
And how are you measuring progress? What benchmarks are you setting?
Well, we have a couple. I actually, before the pandemic, we actually put out, the leadership team felt before George Floyd, before any of this, we're like, we need to promote more people of color. We're not excelling there. We had done a really good job in certain areas, but we were lacking, particularly men of color. And we had created this program where we were bringing folks together to really get them more development, a little more exposure. And we just took that program, and now I've really expanded it. And so we're looking at that program and the number of promotions. So we're actually looking at real numbers. We want to make sure that, and look, we're not going to solve this overnight, but if you don't have numbers and kind of a measurement system to say, are we making progress? You're never going to get there. We use our Great Places to Work survey, because that survey is a culture survey, and there are a lot of open-ended questions that can really give you a sense. One of the things they've been working on is this question around feeling like you belong. And I don't know if they have the question down right yet. I think we're all still trying to figure it out. But, there's one thing to say you have a diverse and inclusive group or a company. It's another thing that people walk in the door every day or online and actually feel like they belong and could be their true self inside a company. And that's where I think you really make a difference, where people feel like I can come in and be who I want to be, when I want to be it, and not feel, threatened in any way or feel like I'm fully accepted. That measure is a hard measure to get to, I must admit, but it's one we keep trying to chase a little bit, because I think that's when you really know you have a very inclusive culture that accepts everyone.
And then how do you make your choices? And I know the corporate citizenship programs are very important to you and very important to Synchrony. How do you make your choices given the profound level of need during this crisis? How do you make your choices in terms of what to focus your corporate citizenship program on?
It is quite stark on the needs that are out there. I think it's opened up many, many needs. So, one, I'd say we leverage our diversity networks to really look at a fairly granular level what is going to make a difference. And I'll give you an example, because I think this is an area people don't talk about. We have a Native American network. We've done a lot in the Native American community around, getting money into that community, helping with education, helping with internet, I think, when you hear the stories of those communities, I mean, very difficult as well. So we use our networks, but then we actually stepped back and said, okay, how can we really make a big difference? And we just relaunched a campaign really around education as an equalizer. And we're really leveraging that platform now to really give, I think, more substantial grants. We're not a big company, but we've really put our money aside, $50 million, to really look at education as an equalizer. And we're working on a whole bunch of different programs around that, and giving to universities where it makes sense, but also developing programs where it makes sense.
That gets us to the big question that now is being debated, which is the CEO role on social issues. It's being sharply debated right now. How do you make choices as a CEO in terms of what issues in the public square you're going to engage on, particularly, given all, again, the serious and big challenges we're facing, and what role does the board play in that process? Are those really a CEO decision? Is it a CEO decision with the board?
Well, I think it's a great question, because I think if you just went back to, and it seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't. I remember probably one of the first areas that became kind of a hot spot was Charlottesville. And, a lot of CEOs, I was actually at a dinner with a number of CEOs who were really concerned about, what do I do? How do I, my employees are asking me X, Y, and Z. I don't know. Should I get involved? Not get involved? I think for us, we realized pretty quickly we needed to have kind of a framework on how we were going to approach these things. Because I do think it's important that you just don't jump into everything. You have to have a platform that ties, one, to your values, and two, we look at things that impact our employees, our customers, our families of Synchrony, if you will. And we'll step back and say, is this an area where, one, we feel strongly about because it's very against the values of the company, and two, an area where we think we can have somewhat of an impact through our voice, right? Otherwise, you can quickly, be spending all your time talking about social issues and not running the company. So I think you have to be thoughtful about these things. And I think you also have to figure out, can you make an impact as a voice, and where do you want to make that impact? And so we've kind of been using that screen. We do talk to the board about it. Our board is we have a very highly engaged board. I have a very diverse board, which actually has come to our advantage through all of this, because we've gone to them and said, like, what do you think about this? And they're like, I'm not so sure I'd go down that path, or, maybe you want to go this way or that way. So, we definitely leverage that group, and we leverage our networks, by the way. There have been one or two things where, particularly our African-American network, where we went to them and they're like, no, this is not an area where I would jump in on this, because that's not really how we're thinking. So sometimes the media gets caught up on something and you think it's important, and then you actually talk to the folks and they're like, not really, I wouldn't go there. So I think, these are hot topics, and you gotta have a strong backbone, I think, to kind of jump in, but you also have to make sure you have real credibility on the things that you're talking about.
So we're at a important inflection point, both in terms of the economy, the pandemic, and also social issues. And looking ahead, what do you see as the most important challenges that Synchrony leadership will be facing? And what leadership lessons would you highlight as the most important that you learned during the past year and a half of these crises to carry forward?
Sure. So I think that the really important piece for all of us, CEOs, everyone, is we have to continue to look at the economic disparity. Because I think if you really step back, and even with the George Floyd issue, if you really dig deep, there's a lot of economic disparity that's causing a lot of problems. And I think it came to light in many of these communities, even just in terms of healthcare, right? So I think we as leaders have to continue having that dialogue and thinking through, how can we continue to help and influence? The second piece, I think that's really important, is we need to continue to work with our employees to really make sure that we're giving them the right skills to really grow their careers. And if you start out as a call center rep in Synchrony, you should feel like you could be the CEO someday. I mean, I started out in a call center. So how do we continue to lift people up and give them that ladder so that they can continue to excel in that career? And I think, if we can take people from a salary to from an hourly to a salary level, that's a big deal for people. That's a game changer for families. And I think that's something we spend time thinking about inside Synchrony. I think that's really important. So I think we got to continue both internally in our companies and even externally where we can help to have that level of influence and continuing to talk about things. I think something as simple as, look, we all saw the videos of kids like in McDonald's trying to do their homework because they didn't have internet at home. I mean, these are pretty, internet is like basic now, right? It's like someone compared it recently to like electricity in the 20s, I guess, right? Not everyone had it. And then they just made a decision, we're going to get everyone electricity. We almost need that kind of thinking to really fix some of these fundamental areas that I think are part of how we operate today. And I think the internet's a good example of that. In terms of my lessons, I would say I've worked a very long time. I would say this past year was probably the most challenging year as a leader. And what I learned through this process is everyone was impacted so many ways, and people were really afraid, particularly around the pandemic. They were really afraid, and they continue to be nervous. We do now it's down to like every other week, I believe, kind of an all employee call where people can get on and ask questions of medical experts. We've kind of rotated medical. We get 3,000, 4,000 people on these calls, so people are still asking questions. So I think what I learned was I needed to be very visible. As an example, when we first started our first all employee, we were doing, just a kind of a phone call, so you can call in kind of thing. And I was like, no. Our employees need to see us. They need to see that we're calm. They need to see that we're confident. And so I just kept reiterating, we're going to be okay. Everyone's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And I think that's what employees were and people were looking for. And we had families on. I'm not even kidding. We had full families on many of these calls because there was so much challenge and nervousness. And we did a lot even for families around social injustice. We had experts come in. We had folks figure out how to talk to children. How, as a parent, do you talk to your children about the pandemic? How do you talk to your children about social injustice? And we had all kinds of groups. And I think people were looking for that kind of support throughout this year. So I think that's something that, I think now it's not necessarily going to go away, because I do think now people are looking for information and confidence. And I think that's going to continue.
Yeah. Margaret, you're clearly values driven. You're passionate about it. Culture at Synchrony is so important to you, as well as innovation. Who are the most important leadership role models in your career, your life? The focus in terms of lifting employees up has been on making sure there's mentorship, sponsorship. Who were the most influential role models for you?
There are probably there's a handful that I really look at. One is Dan Schulman from PayPal. I think Dan is just a very unique individual. He's someone where I would say we connect because we have this sense of purpose that's bigger than just ourselves and our company. And, I look to Dan, he's an incredible leader, and he's just an incredible person in terms of the things that he's done. I think the other one that I just had lunch with him a couple of weeks ago is Ajay Banga from MasterCard, another person who, again, I think aspires to do the right thing and lift up MasterCard and the company in a way that's really giving back and thinks about culture very seriously. So, I'd say those two are kind of at the top of my list in terms of, I look at what they do, I chat with them. We actually, I believe, have a connection because of the values and the way we all think. So I'd say those are two that are high on my list.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It is really our privilege to be honoring you as a 2021 distinguished leader. We very much value the priorities that you place as a leader in the business community. And we're really looking forward to October 25th when we see you in New York. So thank you so much, Margaret.
It's going to be so great to see people in person too. So I'm looking forward to it.